Okay, well, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Paulette Lee and I'm the producer for Microsoft. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this PwC and Microsoft webinar on data security. This webinar should be about 45 minutes in length, and we will open up for Q&A at the end with our speakers. We are broadcasting through Microsoft Teams, so by participating in the webinar means that you are consenting to be in the recording. The recording and the deck shared today will be shared with the registered attendees. So if you have not registered, please do so now with the link in the chat window. Thank you for adhering to the Microsoft Digital Code of Conduct, which will also be in the chat window. We have two speakers today that Sloan will introduce to us. So with that, I will turn it over to Sloan to get us started.
Great, thank you, Paulette, and hello and welcome everyone. If you're listening to us live, welcome. We're really excited to have you today to talk about modernizing data security, really enabling data protection with Microsoft. Both PwC and Microsoft have excellent speakers. I will be helping moderate, so monitoring those questions as they come in. You can see that link at the top of your Teams functionality in your Teams window. And for those that are listening to the recording, we will do our best to repeat those questions. We'll do that at the end or real time if it makes sense. So I'll be helping moderate. So again, I'm Sloan Minkus. Thank you, Paulette, for turning it over to me. And I am our PwC Microsoft Alliance leader for our cyber and risk services. And with that, I would love to hand it over to, let's see, Matteo Malanino. Let you introduce yourself. We have two great speakers.
Thanks, Sloan. Hello, everybody. I'm Matteo Malagnino, and I'm a senior global cloud solution architect working in the partner success team for Microsoft. So I do work close with PwC, assisting our customer together to better shape their security posture and compliance, like in this case.
And Nidu, how about you? May I ask you to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sloan. Thank you, Matteo. Hello, everyone. My name is Nidu Nalin, and I'm also part of the cybersecurity risk and reg practice in PwC, and I'm the Microsoft Defender solution leader for PwC. I bring in 15 years of business transformation experience, specifically focusing on data protection.
Well, as I mentioned, everyone, we have two fabulous speakers. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to you. I will help monitor those questions and answers and come back to you when you finished your presentation with some questions that we will probably get. So thank you.
Thank you, Sloan. All right. So welcome to everybody who joined this webinar today. And the focus of this webinar is to understand how do we think about data security, what that journey looks like, and how can we modernize that journey using some powerful technology and solutions available to us from Microsoft. And the key four themes which we are planning to cover in this session, first one is that where is the industry going? What are some of the key trends, and why is this important? Why do we need to talk about this? Why do we need to plan around these initiatives? And then we'll get into the basics. What does it mean when we say data protection? What are some of the core capabilities of a data protection program? What does that look like, and how each of those capabilities can be enabled using Microsoft technologies? And then we'll get into how do we think about the entire data protection journey end to end. Like I said, it's a journey. So it takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of planning, and what are some of the key milestones and key steps along the way to get you to a place where you have a mature data security program for your organization. And then the last one is that what do we bring together as alliance partners? Like what kind of capabilities do we bring together? What kind of work have we done, and the recognitions associated with that? All right. So what are some of the key trends, and where is the industry moving overall? So some of the key metrics as demonstrated on the slide, as you can see, that 93% of the organizations are either already in the process of adopting cloud or they have a plan to adopt cloud. Now that's a huge number. where things are going to change. It's not the traditional on-premises model where there's that which the model has been there for many, many years. So there is a big understanding associated with, okay, how do I manage data in an on-premises environment? Now, as things shift to cloud, how does that change? How do I make sure that I am still organizing and protecting my data as needed by both internal and external requirements? Then 38% of the executives, as they are thinking through this transformation, are worried about the vulnerabilities associated with adopting cloud and putting your most sensitive data out there. And then, as you can see here in the slide as well, like 48% of the organizations they already have a multi-cloud strategy where they are leveraging different capabilities offered by different cloud service providers. How is that ecosystem should work? Like, how is that going to work? And at the same time, it shouldn't compromise any of their requirements and open themselves to any vulnerabilities and risks in the market. So due to this change, like what are some of the key challenges the organizations are facing? So the first one is capability effectiveness. So now, since the game is changing, now it's not on premises anymore. Now it's cloud. How do we have enough capabilities or mature capabilities in place to continue providing the same level of data protection capabilities? Like that's where like some of these organizations are. How does the regulatory landscape change? What do I need to do extra if I am putting my data out in the cloud? Or how do I make sure that I'm still compliant with both internal and external regulatory requirements when I am making this transformation from on premises to cloud? And how do I get my organization ready for this change to be successful and its change to have the appropriate return on our investment? How do I make sure that my data is protected in all the states, whether I'm using the data, whether the data is in motion, whether the data is at rest? How do I ensure that the controls I have to implement make sure that they are protected and do not lead to any unauthorized exposure of sensitive data? And last piece is like, how do I govern this? How do I make sure that it's not once said and done? So how do I make sure that this system continues to work? How do I define appropriate governance, the policies, the metrics? How they should evolve from what I have today for on premises? How do those controls, metrics, and policies change when I think about cloud adoption? So those are like some of the common challenges each of those organizations in their cloud adoption journey face. In the next section, this is where we want to talk about some of the foundations. What does it mean when we say data protection? What are some of the key capabilities of a data protection program? So data protection is the practice of properly securing data contained in organizational assets to prevent against data leakage or security breaches. Essentially, if you don't have access to it, or if there is no need for you to have access to it, you should not have access to it, because that also counts as an unauthorized exposure of your sensitive data. How do I make sure if anybody inside your organization or external to your organization is trying to misuse the data? How do I make sure that I have appropriate controls in place to flag that behavior and prevent it from happening? So these are all some of the like key capabilities of a data protection program. But as we look through the slide, it all starts with defining what is sensitive to you. For every organization, this could mean a little bit different. Like we always talk about like, okay, there's PII, there's PCI, there's PHI, and then there is intellectual property. So it all starts with define what is sensitive to you and what is the risk associated with different types of sensitive data you may have in the organization. Once you know what is sensitive to you, the next step is to find out where is that sensitive data, which is what the discover capability is all about. And now we know what's important to me, where that data is. The next step is to implement appropriate controls to protect that data, whether it's being used, whether it's being shared, whether it's being stored, how do I make sure that it's protected appropriately? And the last step is, as organizations on a day-to-day basis interact with this data, how do I make sure that it's not leading to any kind of misuse or unauthorized data exposure? So that's where monitoring plays a big role here. And I would like to hand over to Matteo to add additional insights from his end.
Yes, thanks, Nido. Exactly, you were spot on. I mean, this is a journey, right? And that journey is really something that we need to understand from, let's say, the start of this journey to the end. But it's also let me say, a continuous journey or a continuous approach that we need to have as part of this path, we can say. So a continuous way of defining and changing the sensitive data. I mean, you know that we can define sensitivity, but we need also to make sure that we have a sort of ever-changing capabilities or quick change capabilities, adapting to the new world, adapting to the new location in the discovery phase. We can add that. So having capabilities of trying to understand where my data is, but always trying to understand where my data is, I would say, right? And the same thing happened for protection and monitoring. So having a platform and a partner that can give you an overall approach and an overall new approach to the journey, like it was in the past. If you remember, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, we tried to define where the data is, we try to define what sensitive data is, and then stick with it for 15 years. That's not that's impossible at the moment. And with the proliferation of the cloud, with the proliferation of working from home, bring your own devices, data is everywhere, and we can really try to have this journey there to approach our customer through this journey.
Yep. Thank you. All right. So in the next section, we just want to walk through what that sample workflow looks like. So we talked about defining, discovering, protecting, and monitoring. So what does that look like for an organization? So the very first component of it is defining your sensitive data. Like I said, every organization, may have a different take to this, but essentially it comes down to, when I classify something as sensitive, the level of sensitivity should govern the type of controls I'm going to implement in order to protect that data. Not every sensitive data element will pose the same level of risk. So that's something it's a matrix system. So you define okay, I have SSN, I have first name, I have eye color. Now, if I put these data elements by itself, can a data element by itself uniquely identify somebody? That may pose a higher risk compared to maybe a zip code associated with an address of an individual. So that's where the organizations have to spend a little bit of time to understand what are the different sensitive data types in their environment and what is the risk of losing each of those individual data elements, and then put together a structure which helps them to focus on all the high risk data elements and define similar controls for lower risk and medium risk data elements as well. And then the next step is discover. But before you think about discovering, you need to start with some kind of an asset inventory. What kind of systems do you have in your environment? What are whether it's on premises, whether it's cloud, the applications, associated databases, servers, what kind of assets do you have? Structured, unstructured, having an initial inventory of assets would help you to identify and drill down further to understand what are my most critical assets based on the information on the criticality of the data element that's being stored within those assets. Then the next one is, we think now we know what we have to protect, what's sensitive to an organization. We know what kind of assets we have in and around the organization, the next step is to do a sensitive data discovery where you're looking for these sensitive data elements in your environment. And this is typically done by configuring scanning solutions, writing algorithms so that you can look for certain data patterns, and then you compile a list of your most sensitive critical data assets. And once you have that, you have now a place to apply all of your controls, like whether it's encryption, data loss prevention, same handling processes. So and when we talk about protection, it is not just technical controls. You also need to think about like business controls. Like for instance, if there is a hard copy of a sensitive document, how do you deal with managing destructing that, archiving it, storing it? So those are more business or operational type of controls. So you need to think from both holistic perspective, like what are my tech enabled controls and what are my business slash operational controls for protecting that data element. And then the last step is that as organizations continue to use these data elements, how do you make sure that the data elements or the sensitive data and information is not being misused? And this is where monitoring plays a huge role, and where you talk about, okay, whether a user is sharing that information internally or sharing information externally, is that an authorized action? And if it's an unauthorized action, what kind of proactive and reactive controls you can implement to ensure that the risk associated with unauthorized exposure is minimized. So that's what a typical sample workflow looks like for a data protection program. All right, over to you, Matteo.
Yes, thanks, Nino. So basically, we are trying to what we will do with this approach. We will take back what Nido has just explained at the moment and trying to map everything with our platform, our Microsoft Purview platform. Basically, we have a new name for a platform that somebody already knows, which is which was compliance.microsoft.com. Now it's called Microsoft Purview from a little while, from 7, 8 months, something like that. Basically, I'm talking about platform. That's why we got Microsoft Purview as the background of all this journey that Nido just explained. Because Microsoft Purview is a full platform that can really start, and we'll see that in another slide later on, that can assist through this journey. And that's what we are doing together with PwC. PwC is leveraging our technology, our platform, in our shared customer, to make sure to follow that path and that logical approach to the different kind of step that we have. If we talk about sensitive data definitions or sensitivities, if we're talking about defining sensitive data types, we cannot talk about Microsoft information protection. Microsoft information protection is part of Microsoft Purview now. It's fully part of Microsoft Purview, and it really evolved from the old days, let me say. It evolved in a way that we provide through the platform capability of spot on going from structured to unstructured data and understanding what kind of sensitivity there's around, giving you hints, giving you approach and native approach into what kind of sensitive data needs to be treated inside your organization or our customer. That's why I put, for example, a data map as part of the inventory assets. We need to understand that Purview is a platform that extends its capability also to manage data information wherever it sits. It can sit on-prem, it can sit in other cloud, it can be multi-cloud, it can be hybrid, it can be in Azure, it can be absolutely natively in Microsoft 365 with SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange Online, and so on. And of course, also desktop devices. So where the data is in terms of, hey, this guy is having everything on his desktop and he has really sensitive information there. So we have capabilities through Purview to really have visibility all over the estate, the digital estate. Then if we move on to the sensitive data discovery, I added here sensitivity and advanced e-discovery. Why I added advanced e-discovery? Because e-discovery is, of course, an activity, another activity from a normal sensitive data discovery, but is part, of course, of the discovery of specific information. And e-discovery is just a precursor of what we have, for example, in Purview, uh, to the new communication compliance side of the house, or the let's say investigation side of the house that we have within the sensitive data discovery. But then we don't have to forget the sensitivity info types that are out of the box. If you turn on Microsoft Purview, and PwC knows well how to do that, if you turn on Microsoft Purview, it immediately gives you a spot on visibility after like less than a week on what kind of sensitive info types that are inside your organization. And these answer one of the old question, and one of the question, or the historical question that we have within this market, which is, should I look for where my data is or what my data is? Well, actually, you should look for both. At the beginning of this market, we were saying, hey, let's concentrate on where the data is. Now we need to concentrate on what the data is. And that's why we need intelligent way of understanding that. One of the nice feature that we have as part of Purview, for example, is the capability to have a machine learning module that is called trainable classifier, that allows you to really have a classification level. So let's say the gap that is between the data discovery and the sensitive data protection, which allows you to add sensitive info types based on machine learning. So if you feed this machine learning engine, which will crawl your data and say, hey, I do recognize that this data looks like sensitive data. So it looks like something. And this to go to the sensitive data protection, which of course is always covered by Microsoft Information Protection, but also by Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. If you think about our CASB, the integration, the native integration that there is between our Purview and our CASB, or Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, which allow you to also block and leverage what you have defined in a structured way, let's say, in the first instance of this journey, across multi also SaaS services such as Salesforce, or G Cloud, or I don't know, Google for Workplace, or whatever you can add to this stage. Then if you go to the last step, Nidu,
Yep.
yeah, we have monitoring. So it's really crucial to have always monitoring. Well, I added even here, information protection, the framework for cloud apps for simplification. But literally, the message here is saying that Purview allows you something that was not there before, an overall capability of understanding how my data is flowing across my organization, and also outside of my organization, and eventually blocks that, and eventually giving you capability of sharing the information, for example, of a DLP incident that is happening within Microsoft Purview, which is natural, that needs to be added to another level at the moment of incident capability, of incident management, let me say. And that's why we have announced that we have delivered a full integration on the Microsoft Purview platform with Microsoft 365 Defender, which allows you basically to have the same alert that you are seeing in the DLP, let's say incident inside Microsoft Purview, inside that also Microsoft 365 Defender, so to reassemble the full incident path and the full incident, let's say, kill chain, also with the information that has been stolen due to that incident that is happening and being tracked by our EDR capabilities or XDR capabilities. So the extension and the, let me say, the different integration, the different capabilities of a full platform, such as Microsoft Purview, that allows you to really go through that journey, are absolutely unique at the moment. If you go to the next slide, Nida, please. Just to give you an overview of what Microsoft Purview is really something that brings together two sides of the historical problem of managing risk, data risk, and data governance. It's not possible nowadays to not put together these two things. We need a unified data governance solution, which is Purview, which will allow you to have data map, data catalog, data state insights across the different digital state of your organization. It could be hybrid, it could be in other cloud, it could be on-prem, it could be in Microsoft 365 and so on. And the side of risk and compliance applied on where the data is. And for example, in the risk and compliance side, you have information protection capabilities, you have data loss prevention capabilities, data lifecycle management capabilities, data connectors. You can integrate different connectors with the risk and compliance side of the house. One of the example, let's say the hot topic at the moment is the insider risk management inside Microsoft Purview. Insider risk management allows you to really understand, thanks to different data connectors, not only how the data is flowing, but if a specific action, such as a lever or a mover, or integrated with the HR system, or integrated with the badge system, is allowing you to understand if something is entering your office at 3 a.m., has never done it, and then starts to download the full SharePoint content. So that's an insider risk management incident, or that could be an insider risk management incident that needs to be evaluated. E-discovery, audit, communication compliance, and of course, compliance manager. We don't have to forget that as part of Purview and as part of this platform, on top of everything, there's compliance. There are too many regulatory compliance that are with how do we treat data, how do we share data, how do we treat personal information, PII, and so on inside our organization. And that's exactly what also our compliance manager as part of Microsoft Purview will give you. It's really crucial also to understand that we have different functions that they can use Microsoft Purview. And as Nido knows, and as PwC knows better than we do for sure, and they can help you on that, these different functions, they cannot work in silos, and they cannot work separately. IT cannot solve the issue of legal teams just providing a tool. But sometimes we need to educate legal teams to leverage that tool, to use that tool, so to have the best of the solution. An example, again, it could be the insider risk management, which is a fully anonymized things, or e-discovery, which is a bubble that you create for your e-discovery activity that IT doesn't want to see, or IT, they don't care to see inside that e-discovery. So that's why we provide a stricter back capabilities within Microsoft Purview for the different pieces of the puzzle, for different pieces of this overall solution. Thanks, Nidu.
Thank you, Matteo. Right. So in the next section, what we want to cover is that how do you think about, like we've been saying this all along during the webinar, that data protection is a journey. So how do we think about that journey, and what are some of the key milestones and activities one need to think about as you are designing or putting together this program for your organization? So this section covers now, as we interact with all of these different organizations, they may be at different points of this journey. It could start, sometimes it may be like, okay, we have, the old tools, we want to move away from the old tools, and we have got, Microsoft E5 license, and with that we have access to a lot of these amazing security capabilities. Help us incorporate that into our data protection program. How do we go about it? That is an example of sometimes where we get involved. Sometimes it's at the beginning where folks are like, okay, I'm moving my entire insurance platform to cloud. So with that, help me define what the data protection program or data protection is going to look like for this new platform, which will be built in the cloud. So that's where we start with the mobilization aspect of it. But some of the key milestones here is that first is like understanding like what your overall data protection strategy is, and how are you going to establish an operating model which helps you meet your objectives. And it could be like, okay, as an organization, we are going to go 100% cloud. If that's your strategy, what kind of data protection operating model do you need in place? That needs to be defined early on so that you can understand, as part of that target operating model, what kind of policies, processes, which is essentially the guardrails, the rules of the kingdom. What kind of guardrails do you need to put in place in order to be compliant? What kind of technology capabilities you need in order to meet those requirements, and how are you making sure that as you continue functioning and as you continue with your business, that at any given time you are complying with the requirements and you are meeting the intent of this target operating model. So that is like the first step. But and one key part of that first step is defining roles and responsibilities. And this becomes even more important when you talk about an organization which is in the process of adopting cloud, because a lot of those responsibilities are going to shift from a traditional on-premises model. So what does that new responsibility model look like? And even within your organization, who is responsible for what? Who needs to bring different aspects and different capabilities together in order for you to have a data protection program which meets all the different needs of business? Then the next step is where we get into the actual definition of what are, and we talked about this a little bit in the previous section, that what is sensitive to you, what kind of data protection controls you need in place, what are your requirements as an organization. If you're a healthcare client, you will be governed a little differently than if you're an insurance client versus a bank. So you need to understand what your requirements are. What are the different laws which are applicable? And especially for folks who have a global footprint, how does that impact the way you need to think about using and protecting your data? So that's what the next step is, where you define the different elements of your program. Then the next step is discover. Like this is where we get into, like, this becomes more tactical. This is where you are trying to understand, okay, where are my critical data assets, and what is the inventory? Because this, like I said, it's not once said and done. This is an program which has to continue evolving, and it has to be continually monitored in order to ensure that you are in compliance all the time. So this is where discover comes into play. Then we move on to protect. So where you are actually implementing technical controls, you are also implementing more operational controls. And when you're looking about controls, it's not just about controls which apply to you, but also for third party data sharing. If you are in a business where there are needs where you have to share sensitive information with external parties, what does that risk look like to you, and what kind of controls can you implement? Because when we talk about a third party or a fourth party environment, there are limited set of controls you can implement in their environment. And so then in those scenarios, a lot of it boils down to what kind of contractual agreements you have in place, what services you are um, providing to your third party, or what services you are consuming from the third party, and what kind of uh, rules or requirements you have for each other in order to ensure that the data is protected even after the handoff from you to the third party. And then the last aspect is monitoring, where again, like this is to ensure that everything works as designed. And if something is not working as it designed, monitoring gives you an ability to figure out those weak spots and then enhance and mature your program to ensure that those weak spots are addressed and your program is continues to be optimized and it matures as we go through this program. Matteo, any perspectives from your end to add?
Absolutely, absolutely great description, Nido, and really, really super efficient and really, really uh, spot on. Um, Powered by Microsoft is what I like. We can provide us, of course, the, the capabilities of following this journey, as already mentioned, the capabilities of allowing you to define a structured, let's say, not one-time activity, but rather a follow-up activity or something that needs to be maintained and be part of your overall strategy and continuous improving your security and compliance through Microsoft Purview. One aspect that I also didn't, let's say, stress enough probably within the other in the other slide, or I forgot, is the real let's say mix of knowledge that there are between PwC and Microsoft. So having the capabilities of, for example, establishing role and responsibilities is something that we are the, let's say, the tool of PwC for doing that, but is the expertise of PwC that is critical and key for defining the strategy, for defining the roadmap, for defining how to approach all this journey and be successful in the adoption of Microsoft Purview and in general in the adoption of a strategy and a data protection strategy like Microsoft Purview. Thanks, Nidu.
Thank you, Matteo. And this slide is just to demonstrate and show that together, like Microsoft and PwC has worked together in helping client with that journey. Depending, it doesn't matter where they are on the journey. This is where we're bringing the best of the technology. We'll bring in our best strategy and execution experiences and work together to help our clients across the globe. So this speaks to like what our global presence is and where we have the ability to pull in resources. If we are talking about a global client, we also have these resources also provide us perspectives on any additional regulatory requirements which we need to be cognizant of in that specific regions as we are thinking about rolling out a solution or a technology for a client which operates in those regions. And definitely, like it's as Matteo said, that we have worked very well together in many different clients. It doesn't matter where they are on their data journey, but we have helped them in establishing a program and are continuing to help them in optimizing their program as they themselves are going through this transformation. And this slide summarizes it very well. So what we've been saying all along, right? So we bring in the proven and tested business-led strategies. We work very well with Microsoft, where we have more cutting-edge technology, access to that, understanding of that, and we work together to work and provide a solution to the client, which would help them in transforming their business. And as we had discussed early on, 93% of the organization are already in the process of transforming themselves. So this is what our value is as we work together. We have worked together very well, and we continue to provide that support to all of these clients. And with that, we will move on to our Q&A. Over to you, Sloan.
Yes, and I'll probably be handing it back over to you shortly. We had a couple of questions come in, and I think both of you implied, or there was an implied answer to this question, but let me ask it so that we can go ahead and get an explicit answer out there. And so let me start with one that came in that was really all about common challenges. What are the ones that you've seen organizations face as they're thinking about protecting data in cloud? using, I'll put the and in there, and using Microsoft technology. And Nidu, maybe I'll tee that up to you.
Thank you, Sloan. And you're right, we covered some of those themes during the presentation today. But just to summarize, like I would say, like there are 4 key themes, right? First is the one common challenge is that understanding your own data. What do you have? What's sensitive to you? What's the risk associated with that data? That's the first thing. Second thing, understanding the regulatory landscape. Regulations change as businesses change, the requirements change. How do you make sure that any given time you are compliant and you're doing the right thing? So understanding of regulatory landscape is definitely the second thing, which I would say is the most important. And the third one is understanding the responsibility model, like roles and responsibility, especially when you're talking about cloud, because that's where things shift. It shifts from what you are used to in your traditional on-premises model. So understanding who's responsible for what, who's responsible for enabling appropriate data protection controls, what you cannot do, how do you enable this? Understanding of that is extremely important. And the last one is that, I mean, like with a powerful technology like Microsoft, where It, like as Matteo was covering, right, Purview, it offers so many different capabilities, and you can use one depending on what your use case is. You can use all, but having an understanding of what licensing and and along with those licenses you have, what capabilities you have and what they can do is also like a key thing which organizations need to understand to get the most out of their data protection journey and Microsoft technology.
Thank you so much for covering that. Matteo, I think I'll tee this next one up to you. Since that was, thank you, Nito, because I think you're right. The themes were hit on during the presentation. So thank you for really walking through that. Matteo, a question came in around how do you approach that data protection in a multi-cloud environment using Microsoft technology? And would love to hear you summarize that for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sloan. Yeah, well, in multi-cloud, there are different definitions, let me say, of how do we protect these and how we approach the data protection strategy in multi-cloud environment. First of all, we need to understand that data is everywhere and not only in, let me say, file server or file location or storage across cloud, but are also in SaaS apps, such as Salesforce, such as Workday, such as you can name them. So we have capability of understanding, and there are in Microsoft 365, and then there are in G Drive, and then there are everywhere. So we need to understand that, and we need to explain that we have two ways of approaching that. One is by leveraging what was called Azure Purview at the beginning, which is basically a data catalog or a data governance solution, which allow you to really have one single place where to have a look at. It could be a file server on-prem, it could be a Samba share somewhere, it could be an EC3 in AWS, or a structured data within a database sitting somewhere. Then we have, of course, our CASB capability. We have our Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, which allow you to really have the same strategy that you are adopting with Microsoft Purview integrated with Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, which allows you to have then an intervention or a look inside your SaaS apps. That could be done, for example, for non-SaaS apps, or even for custom SaaS apps. So I can have like a sort of tunneling solution that allows me to have a live data protection and data block, let's say, of data outside the organization. And then, of course, have the capabilities, the new capabilities in Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, which are really in preview. So that says link into the preview side of the house, which is the SaaS security posture analysis, which is something that allows you to understand how you are configuring your SaaS, not to have a leakage inside your data and in general inside your security posture for your SaaS apps. We do cover everything.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think one more question came in as you were explaining that, Matteo, and thank you so much. But I may push this to you, Nidu, because the question may have been asking, well, with these newer, there may have been an assumption, excuse me, with these newer data protection capabilities, you know, how do you reduce the risk of disrupting business when you are introducing them, when you are going through adopting what you just described, Matteo, and maybe Nito, from a services perspective, perhaps you have some ideas from your experience in implementing this.
Yep. Thank you, Sloan, for that question. I think change management is your best friend, right? Because I think, and as the question was posed, right? So disrupting business, yes, a lot of the capabilities as you roll them out across the organization, they are going to impact your end users. They're going to impact the way they do business on a day-to-day basis. right? It could be a new pop-up. It could be something like they're used to doing certain things a certain way. They can't do that anymore because it just poses a significant risk. So there is a significant impact to the end users as you think about like rolling out some of these capabilities and controls across the organization. So you have to plan appropriately. Like first thing, phased rollout, right? Not a big bang. Big bang never works very well because you're going to disrupt somewhere. Someone is going to like be very upset because you probably will just stop them from doing what they're used to doing in last and have been doing from last 20 years. So phased rollout, making sure that you are sending out appropriate communications out to your entire organization and to the impacted users. In some cases, third party is also included, and also ensuring that you are factoring in the time it takes to like train users. Maybe now they have to get used to a new interface. Maybe they have to get used to a new process of encrypting files before that's being sent, or sharing files externally in a protected way, right? So just define, understand what are the different points where there is a business interruption or impact, and then planning for appropriate training, communication, and phased rollout would help with minimizing or managing that disruption.
I think you're absolutely right. That would all of those things you mentioned would help minimize that business disruption and would make the investment of the new technology so much more well worth it because of
Yep.
the business advantages that you're trying to achieve, as well as the data protection that you're trying to modernize and really bring to the organization. It's a great way to, I think, wrap things up. We don't have any other questions. And so, Nidu, Matteo, wonderful presentation. Thank you for answering the questions. It's been a pleasure to be part of this with you. And I think, Paulette, I'll hand it back over to you to wrap things up.
Yeah, thanks, Sloan. And I concur. Nidu, Matteo, great presentation. And to all the attendees, we will be sending out the recording and the deck in about 7 days. In the meantime, if you could fill out the short survey that's in the chat window to help us improve webinars like this in the future, we would appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.